current WTA ranking, it means the 23-time Grand Slam champion now faces a risky battle because there's a higher chance she'll have to play some of the best players in those early rounds. The move is being panned by a bunch of critics. USA Today sports columnist Nancy Armour writes Serena Williams is being punished for having a baby. That's the only way to see the decision not to give her a seed for the French Open, her first major tournament since giving birth to daughter Olympia in September. Renee Stubbs is with me. She's a former Wimbledon and U.S. Open champion, and she's now an analyst with ESPN. Pleasure to have you on, first and foremost. And secondly, do you think this is fair?
Look, I mean, I disagree with Nancy. The only reason is because the French Open has never changed their seeding throughout the entire existence of the French Open. Wimbledon does because of the grass, and some players are much better on grass than others, so they've really taken their opportunity to change the seedings. The French Open has never done that. Prior to 2005, for example, the WTA had the ability to be able to change seeds. They could put Monica Seles.
But rules aside, I mean, rules matter, but taking the rules aside, the fact that she almost died giving birth, right? The pulmonary embolism, the blood clots, and now you have all these people coming forward and saying she's being punished for having a child. She's been out for all these months. Do you think that is fair?
Well, I don't think it's being punished. That's the thing. I think that, look, Victoria Azarenka has come back from having a baby as well. She's not getting any preferential treatment. She's also a multiple Grand Slam champion. Kim Clijsters came back from having a baby. She was not given a seed. Lindsay Davenport has come back from having a child, was not given a seed. And those were all former champions. Okay, Serena is on the top of the top of the top, arguably the greatest player of all time, 23 Grand Slams. Do I think she should have been seeded? Yes. I think she should have been seeded in the second part of the 16 seeds. So we have a number of seeds. It's not just 8 seeds or 2 seeds. I think she should have been seeded lower because it's really difficult now for the top players. She could play Venus first round. She could play Halep first round. So as far as that's concerned, I think she should have been seeded somewhere. The second of that is I've spoken to a lot of players in the last few hours about this.
What are they saying?
Some players said absolutely she should have been seeded, and some said not. So there's a discrepancy even amongst the tour players about what she should have been given.
Because there's all this noise out there, and I'm just wondering, rip through the noise. Do you think Serena is thinking, seed me at, 453, like, I got this? This is ridiculous that everyone is talking about this, or what?
I can guarantee you that you will not hear a word from Serena Williams until after her first match. She won't talk about this. I don't think she cares about it. I think that it would have been nice for her to have a seed. She would have liked to have had a seed just for the fact that she wouldn't have had to play one of the top players, potentially in the very first round.
Yep.
All of the top seeds are panicked right now. They've got a couple of days to worry about playing Serena first round. Also, the difference in the factor that I think the French Open took into consideration is that Serena hasn't played since, late March in Miami. So she played a tournament in Indian Wells. She played a tournament in Miami. She did okay in Indian Wells. She lost first round to a very good player, Naomi Osaka, who won the tournament the week before. So her results haven't been there on the way back. She knew she came back too early. Is she fit enough now? Yes, because she's entered the French Open. Look, bottom line, throw the seeds in the air, throw the players in the air, put them in a bucket because that's what they do, and they pull them out. And every seed is praying that they don't play her first round. But I don't think Serena cares, to be honest. I think she wants to win the tournament no matter who's in her way.
Which is what matters the most.
It'll be interesting to see what Wimbledon does, though.
We'll be watching. Maybe we'll have you back. Renee Stubbs, thank you so much. A pleasure to have you on. Thank you. Coming up next here, dangerous volcanic eruptions now threatening a power plant in Hawaii. A scientist joins me live to discuss what to expect as ash clouds reach 8,000 feet. Lava cam right there. And back to our breaking news, President Trump now saying his summit with North Korea next month may not happen for sure after all. And what's the story behind this challenge coin featuring Trump and Kim Jong-un? We're back in just a moment. Molten lava is still pouring into the Pacific Ocean now from at least 2 locations, and this was the scene from earlier this morning. Ash clouds bubbling from this latest eruption climbed to 8,000 feet. Now the lava has reached a geothermal power plant. Officials are fast-tracking plans to prevent any additional release of these toxic fumes, but another lava flow is quickly approaching the site. With me now, Marc-Antoine Longpre. He's an assistant professor of volcanology at Queen's University. A pleasure to have you on. I mean, people are glued to this volcano, this lava cam. We were talking commercial break, and you said the thing that really blows your mind the most is that it's now seeping the fissure into the Pacific Ocean.
Right. So it's a very interesting eruption to monitor from a volcanological perspective. So this Kilauea volcano is one of the most active volcanoes on the planet, and has been more or less continuously erupting since 1983. But it was erupting from the same place more or less all this time, from Pu'o vent, located closer to the summit of the volcano. And now the magma is really moving towards the east rift zone in that fissure, and that produces these lava flows that we see are now reaching the sea.
And in doing so, it's the hydrochloric acid and these glass particles that are going along with it.
Yeah, that's right. So when really hot lava interacts with cold seawater, it basically vaporizes the seawater, and the seawater contains salts, and that vaporization creates hydrochloric acid that goes with the steam, and there's little particles of lava that form this glass that also goes with the haze.
Quickly, how long does this last?
Well, that's a good question. So it's
idea.
been, so as I said, the eruption, this is a new phase of the same eruption that's been going on for more than 30 years. But it's hard to predict exactly how long this new phase will last, yeah.
Okay, Professor Marc-Antoine Longpré on volcanology, thank you so much.
Thanks.
We'll keep a close eye on that. I appreciate it, but let's continue on and get you to Washington in the top of the hour. I'm Brooke Baldwin. You're watching CNN here. We're all waiting for this White House briefing to begin any moment now. We are expecting a lot of follow-up questions after President Trump unloaded all kinds of headlines earlier today during this whole photo op with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Topping them all, the fact that you had President Trump suggesting the summit between the U.S. and North Korea may not happen as scheduled, right? It's set for next month in Singapore, and Trump's pullback on the summit comes as President Moon is making a critical pitch to stay on course. Some U.S. officials believe Moon is the one who actually oversold exactly how willing North Korea is to negotiate away its nuclear program. The doubt was sowed after North Korea suddenly threatened to withdraw from talks last week. President Trump casting suspicion right on China for
No, but I think that President Xi is a world-class poker player. And I'd probably maybe doing the same thing that he would do. But I will say this, there was a somewhat different attitude after that meeting, and I'm a little surprised. Now, maybe nothing happened. I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm just saying maybe nothing happened and maybe it did. But there was a different attitude by the North Korean folks when after that meeting. So I don't think it was a great meeting. Nobody knew about the meeting, and all of a sudden it was reported that he was in China a second time. The first time everybody knew about, the second time it was like a surprise. And I think things changed after that meeting. So I can't say that I'm happy about it.
With me now, CNN Global Affairs analyst Joseph Yoon, who just retired after being the U.S. point person for North Korea. He secured the release of American Auto warm beer from North Korea. So, Joe, it's nice to have you back and talk to you again. Let's just begin with President Trump. He seemed to insinuate that it was China, right, that it was Xi who may have been the one to have moved Kim away from this whole summit. Does that explain Trump recently blinking on China? What role, how key is China here in this whole summit?
I would say it is entirely consistent with the Chinese position to want to slow this down. They are worried. I mean, yesterday we heard Vice President Pence saying, President Trump will not get played. I think the Chinese are telling Kim Jong-un, don't get played by Trump. So it is consistent. What China wants is, above all, to have action for action, slow it down, see it how it goes. What Washington wants is immediate and quick denuclearization. And I would say right now, after 2 meetings with the Chinese leader, certainly Kim Jong-un is getting some second thoughts.
And is it, I read that you say we're talking Kim and then the two men today, Trump and Moon, you say it's actually Moon who has the most at stake, that it's South Korea. Why do you say that?
Well, it was, of course, Moon's idea, beginning with just after he got elected, ramping it up during the Winter Olympic Games, and now a bit of shuttle diplomacy going back and forth. More than that, his whole domestic policy platform, domestic politics, is based on this. Now remember, one day after the Singapore meeting, June 13th, there are very important regional elections in South Korea where he's leading by a whole bunch. So there are electoral reasons for Moon as well as history reasons, and so he has most at stake.
And he's the one who floated the notion of a Nobel Peace Prize for President Trump, right, depending on how this whole thing goes. President Trump, one of the headlines that came out of this whole meeting was that he guaranteed Kim Jong-un's personal safety. Here he was.
I will guarantee his safety, yes. We will guarantee his safety. And we've talked about that from the beginning. He will be safe. He will be happy. His country will be rich. His country will be hardworking and very prosperous. They're very great people. They're hardworking, great people.
When you hear that President Trump, Joe, is guaranteeing the safety of Kim, how can he do that? And that he will be, rich and happy, etc.
Well, I think this is fundamental misunderstanding of where North Korea is. Now, Kim Jong-un and North Koreans think they are negotiating from position of strength. They have the nuclear weapons. They have ICBM. So they're saying, why us? You guarantee our security? No, hold on there. We're not going to go in there with the idea of surrendering immediately, which is what the demand from Washington is. So there is this huge mismatch between the expectations in Washington and in Pyongyang.
But on the mismatch and the expectations, if North Korea, and that's a big if North Korea agrees to give up their nukes, they're going to want something in exchange. What is that something, you think?
Their something is complete security guarantee, regime survival. And quite honestly, we can give no first attack security guarantee that we will not be attacking first. But we cannot guarantee personal security. We cannot guarantee regime security. We cannot control what the North Korean people do themselves.
Despite what the president did guarantee today, this is happening. The backdrop, Joseph Yoon, is North Korea has invited a select few journalists to witness the closing of one of its nuclear sites, and our own correspondent is there in North Korea as well. Watch.
We're going to be traveling to the North Korean mountains, to the Punggye-ri nuclear test site. To give you a sense of just how remote this area is, we're going to have to take a train from here in Wonsan on North Korea's east coast, about 11 hours into the mountains. Then it's a 4-hour drive beyond that, maybe more if the roads are bad because of the weather. And then an additional at least 1-hour hike after that, just to get to the nuclear test site at Punggye-ri, where North Korea has conducted 6 nuclear tests since 2006. This is a place that has never been seen by foreign journalists before. The North Koreans say that they're being transparent here, that they're bringing us, the press, to show you the destruction of their nuclear site, the implosion of tunnels, the removal of buildings and researchers and guards, the shutdown of the entire area. Some skeptics say that this is all for show, that the facilities could easily be rebuilt, that the nuclear test site may have been damaged irreparably after last year's nuclear test that triggered a 6.3 magnitude earthquake. But the North Koreans say that's not the case. They say this is a good faith gesture, that they are willing to work with the United States and its allies to give up the nuclear weapons ahead of these crucial planned talks in Singapore next month between the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and President Trump.
Joe, a U.S. defense official also just told CNN that many in the administration think that the closing of that test site is just a total PR stunt. Is it?
Well, we don't know. We really don't know. We don't have enough information. But certainly, the number of steps North Koreans have taken, including closing of that plant, as well as not testing nuclear or ICBM, I would say is not insignificant, and they have some right to feel they've taken the first steps and they want to see the next steps from Washington. I think the gap is so wide now, and really President Moon has his work cut out for him.
Joseph Yoon, thank you.
Thank you.
During that meeting with South Korea's leader, President Trump was also asked about his demand that the Justice Department look into whether the FBI or Justice Department infiltrated or surveilled the Trump campaign for political purposes. At issue, the FBI's use of this confidential source. President Trump didn't refer to this person as that. He kept using the word spy. Here he was.
A lot of people are saying they had spies in my campaign. If they had spies in my campaign, that would be a disgrace to this country. That would be one of the biggest insults that anyone's ever seen, and it would be very illegal. So it would make probably every political event ever look like small potatoes. But if they had spies in my campaign, during my campaign for political purposes, that would be unprecedented in the history of our country.
With me now, journalist, author, CNN political analyst Carl Bernstein. Nice to see you again. First of all, just the president's use of the word spy. The correct phrase is confidential source, yet spy sounds more nefarious.
Well,
yes?
He meant it to be nefarious because what the president did today is really to abuse his authority, as he has been doing, to intervene in a legitimate investigation into his conduct, the conduct of his family, the conduct of his campaign, related to what happened in the presidential campaign and whether the Russians intervened with aid from his campaign. This is a legitimate investigation that at every turn he tries to undermine and demean, and this is part of the cover-up, what we are watching, a cover-up by the President of the United States.
Isn't that what so much of this is about, is undermining Mueller,
undermining?
We don't know how the end of what the end of the movie is, right? But whatever the findings, this would undermine it.
Well, look, that's what he sought to do from the beginning, is to cast doubt on the press, on the investigation, on the Democrats, to make the conduct of everybody involved except himself, his aides, and his family the issue here. But I think what you just said, take a look at what Chris Christie said today about Mueller. He said, and he told the president this, he said that Bob Mueller himself is not a partisan. He's a hardworking guy. He's smart, and you can't argue that the investigation hasn't been effective. So far, a number of guilty pleas, a couple of indictments in a year. Pretty good work. And as I've said all along to the president, he means Bob Mueller's honesty or integrity never have been questioned and shouldn't be. And having worked with him for 7 years, I still wouldn't question his integrity. I might have read a word or two of that wrong there. But basically, here you have Chris Christie, the advocate during the campaign for Donald Trump, saying,
he's a good guy.
Look, he's not only a good guy, he's conducting a legitimate investigation that's making progress. Leave it alone. The president, by contrast, will not leave it alone as this investigation is closing in on him and members of his family. That's what we're witnessing. And what's so extraordinary is that it is being his cover-up is being aided and abetted by Republicans in Congress and helped by his base, rather than seeking the facts here. Look,
let me on that note, Carl, Adam Schiff is the one who says history will judge this Congress harshly for not being strong enough to act against actions such as
I think history will judge everybody, including journalists, including members of Congress, including the Republican Party, what they did at this juncture of our history when this abuse of power and authority and cover-up by the President of the United States occurred. And none of that is to say, incidentally, that this cover-up is necessarily an obstruction of justice. We don't know all the things Trump is trying to keep us from knowing. But we do know there is a cover-up, and that if, as he says, there's no there's no collusion there, even though we have seen members of his family, his closest aides, invite with enthusiasm collusion at the Trump Tower meeting and elsewhere. Ask for collusion. I love it, to quote his son, at the prospect of a collusion to give the Trump campaign information from the Russians. So this is a cover-up, and that's what we need to keep our eyes on, and he is trying to interfere in this investigation. And What we've seen from the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein is trying to protect and keep this investigation alive before Trump shuts it down, which Trump has told people around him he is intent on doing.
Right. One of the questions in the poll spray was about the Deputy Attorney General, and on that, the president wouldn't answer on Rod Rosenstein in front of Moon Jae-in, yet at the same time went on the tirade with regard to this being a disgrace to the country. So there's that. Stick around with me, Carl Bernstein. I want more from you as we wait for Sarah Sanders to take to that podium for the White House daily briefing here. Live pictures inside the room. The journalists are ready to roll. Quick. We're back. You're watching CNN on a Tuesday. Live pictures inside that White House press briefing room as we wait for Sarah Sanders to take to that podium and answer a lot of questions, especially out of all the headlines that came out of the president's meeting there, where he answered a lot of questions on this whole upcoming summit with the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, forgive me, and he was sitting there with the president of South Korea, President Moon. So let's go to Pamela Brown, who is standing by, our senior White House correspondent, in that briefing room. And Pamela, I mean, so many headlines made. Where do you want to begin? Oh, here she is.
Starting, Brooke.
Concluded a productive meeting with South Korean President Moon. This is the sixth visit between them. Two leaders had significant conversations on important issues, including the scheduled U.S.-North Korea summit. Both leaders are committed to working together to accomplish the common goal of complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. As you also know, it's commencement season, and the President and First Lady would like to extend a special congratulations to World War II veteran Bob Barger. 68 years since he last sat in a classroom, Bob graduated from the University of Toledo. This month, after a review of his transcripts from the late 1940s, showed he completed enough courses to qualify for an associate's degree. As the President said in his letter to Bob, his hard work, diligence, and passion to learn exemplify the greatest generation's commitment to excellence and the American spirit. As you know, the President took a number of questions earlier, so we'll keep this short today, and with that, I'll get started. Jonathan.
Sarah, do you agree with the South Korean official who said that there would be a 99% chance that this summit with Kim Jong-un comes off? And how will the president ultimately make the decision about whether or not to go?
The president addressed this earlier directly to you and said that we'll see what happens. We continue to prepare for the summit, and if they want to meet, we will certainly be ready. And the president, I think, rightly stated that if North Korea agrees to denuclearize, that it can be a bright future for them. But we remain clear-eyed in these negotiations, but we continue to prepare, and we'll see what happens.
What preconditions, though, does he have? What does he see that the North Koreans have to do to make him make that trip? And let me just ask you, the challenge coins were made. Was it premature to make those coins commemorating the summit?
So on the first part of your question, the president's laid out what he wants to see as a commitment to denuclearization. That has not changed. In terms of the coins, this is not something that the White House has anything to do with. We don't have any input on the design, the manufacture, the process in any capacity. This is a standard procedure by the White House Communications Agency, which is made up exclusively of career military officials, and these coins are designed and done by that organization. Pamela?
Thank you, Sarah. Why would the U.S. guarantee the safety of a dictator whose regime is a serial human rights abuser and is responsible for the recent death of an American college student? Why is that the morally right thing to do?
Again, the goal and the purpose of these conversations would be to have complete and total denuclearization of the peninsula, and the president has been upfront about that part of the conversation, and we're going to continue to move forward.
Just to follow up, though, Sarah, really quickly.
Sorry, I'm going to keep moving just because we're going to be really short today. Major, go ahead.
Sarah, you talked about preparations for the summit. Can you describe for us how the president himself is personally preparing? Who is he working with? How much time does he devote on a daily basis to get ready for the underlying themes? questions and difficulties of a summit of this magnitude?
As you all know, he spent a significant amount of time meeting both in person and having regular phone conversations with other world leaders like you saw today with South Korean President Moon, as well as he has constant and regular meetings with his national security team. This is something they talk about on a daily basis and will continue to in preparation. Jordan?
Thanks, Sarah. I want to ask about this meeting the Chief of Staff is setting up for lawmakers regarding the documents that they've requested about the Russia investigation. Can you say what specific documents the lawmakers will be allowed to see? Chairman Nunes has requested all documents related to this intelligence source. Will he get to see all of the documents?
That's something that you would have to ask the Department of Justice. I can tell you the President asked Chief of Staff Kelly to set up the meeting. It is scheduled to take place on Thursday of this week. The individuals that are expected to attend are Chairman Nunes, Chairman Gowdy, FBI Director Wray, DNI Director Coates, and DOJ official Ed O'Callaghan. No one from the White House staff will attend. Blake?
The North Koreans are bringing in some journalists to view what they say is the dismantling of a nuclear test site. Curious if the administration believes that site is already damaged, as some are led to believe, and what exactly the administration's response is to this.
I don't have anything that I can comment on that at this front. Steve?
Yes, Sarah. Can you tell us what was the outcome of the discussions between the South Korean president and President Trump today about the size and cost of U.S. troops in South Korea?
The focus, at least in the meeting that I was in, that specifically did not come up, but certainly conversations primarily centered around preparations towards the scheduled summit. Darling.
You said that no one from the White House staff will attend the meeting on Thursday. Does that not mean that the Chief of Staff, Kelly, would not attend?
He was charged with coordinating and making sure it took place, but at this point is not expected to attend. Michael.
Can you respond a little bit, though, to why no Democrats would be at that meeting? If the White House is putting its imprimatur on it, the Democrats have said that they think it's inappropriate to have a meeting set up with just Republicans in the Justice Department. Would the White House welcome Democrats to be at that meeting?
We'll keep you posted. My understanding is they haven't been the ones requesting this information.
They say that to the extent that the White House is sort of brokering a deal between the Justice Department and
I hardly call brokering a deal to set up help coordinate a meeting and help Congress receive information that they've requested. To my knowledge, the Democrats have not requested that information, so I would refer you back to them on why they would consider themselves randomly invited to see something they've never asked to. Jeff?
Sarah, the President spoke at length this morning about his vision for a solution to dealing with Chinese company ZTE. Both Republicans and Democrats on the Hill are criticizing that, saying that he is bowing to pressure from Beijing. Senator Schumer, I believe, called it a wet noodle solution. What's the White House's response to that criticism?
The U.S. and China relationship has a number of issues that we're constantly having conversations. National security, trade, ZTE is among one of those, and this is something that the President has asked Commerce to look into, and he's outlined some possible actions against ZTE by Commerce, but at this point they're still in discussion, and there's nothing else to add beyond what the President already said this morning.
To their criticism, though, about what he has said on Capitol Hill?
Like I've said a few times before, Senator Schumer is not somebody this White House is probably ever going to take advice from on how to negotiate or get a good deal on anything, particularly based on his track record. And certainly, I think his weakness when it comes to China. We finally have a president who's actually calling out China on their unfair trade practices, and not just calling them out, but actually doing something about it and aggressively pushing forward in negotiations, something that we haven't seen in decades. And so Senator Schumer is probably the last person we would call and ask for on how to make a deal. Anita?
I wanted to change topics. I wanted to get your comment on this incident that happened at the EPA earlier today. They were having a national summit on water contaminants. At least 2 reporters were barred from going into the event, and 1 was forcibly removed. I wondered if you had a comment. Do you approve of how that was handled, and will anyone be speaking to the press office over there about it?
Certainly, we'll look into the matter. I've seen the reports. I know EPA has put out a statement. At this point, I would refer you to them as we look into the incident. I don't have a lot of visibility since certainly we weren't there and we're in other meetings here, but something we are certainly going to look into. But at this point, I'd refer you to the statement the EPA put out. I can't speak to a situation that I don't have a lot of visibility into, but I would refer you back to their statement. Stephen?
Sarah, back to North Korea just for a second. The president of the Oval Office said that he was disappointed that after his second meeting with Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un seemed to have a change of attitude. Does the White House have any theories as to why that might be? What, is China a spoiler, and why?
The president spoke to this directly. There's nothing else to add at this point. Mike?
Can you add anything more about the president's comments? He said that China, South Korea, and Japan were willing to invest very large sums of money into North Korea. Can you add anything more to that? Is the U.S. planning to add to that very large sum? Can you describe what kind of money he's talking about there?
I don't have anything to add beyond the president's comments. I think
Can you talk at all about what President Moon said about Kim, about the new tenor coming out of Pyongyang, what President Trump learned in the meeting with President Moon?
We felt like the conversations today were productive, and again, we're going to continue in preparations, and we'll see what happens. Hallie?
Sarah, to follow up on Anita, and then a question as well to you, is there any situation, barring a security incident, in which you feel the White House feels it is appropriate to physically touch or physically handle?
I'm not going to weigh into random hypotheticals that may or may not exist. I don't know any information about this specific incident. You're asking me to. No, you're asking me to speak to a blanket possibilities, which I'm not going to do, nor would I ever ask or expect you to do. John?
My other question was actually on the.
Sorry, I'm going to do one question at a time today because we got short on time. John, go ahead. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yep. Sorry, I'm going to keep moving. We're tight on time. Thanks.
Considerable discussion back and forth about the tenure of Speaker Ryan, whether he will relinquish his gavel early and have a new election of a speaker before the elections. Conservative lawmakers on Capitol Hill made it clear that they want Ryan to stay. Congressman Warren Davidson said that's unfair to the new members coming in. And he also said that there should be a discharge position so members can have an up and down vote on repeal of the Affordable Care Act and immigration. Does the president agree with the statements of Congressman Davidson and the conservatives among House Republicans?
I haven't spoken with him specifically about that statement, so I wouldn't want to wade into that right now. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. The president earlier today in that press availability spoke about the protections that he's prepared to offer to Kim Jong-un, not only personally but also for his country. In preparing for these meetings and when the summit actually takes place, does human rights play any consideration in the meeting that the president will have with Kim Jong-un?
I'm not going to get ahead of the discussion that the president and Kim Jong-un could have, but certainly we would expect that would come up and be addressed. Charlie?
Following up on John's earlier question, does the president back Speaker Ryan's decision to stay in office until after the election, or is he concerned that there's maybe a period of time when he's not getting as much done as he could, just serving as a lame duck speaker?
Yeah, at this point, that's something for Speaker Ryan and members of Congress to make that determination, not something that the White House has weighed into at this point. Francesca?
Thank you, Sarah. We heard from President Trump before that meeting with President Moon, but after sitting down with him, does President Trump feel more like this summit is worth having and that it will happen? And what is the White House's drop-dead date, so to speak, for deciding whether or not to go to the summit?
Again, we're going to continue to prepare, and we'll see what happens. There's really nothing to add beyond that at this point. We'll take one last question. Ben?
Thank you, sir. I wanted to ask about Gaza. The violence continued today. Does the White House have any plans to meet with the Palestinian Authority?
There are no scheduled meetings at this point, but if something changes, we'll certainly let you guys know. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
All right, so Carl Bernstein with me here, and let's just run through some of what we heard, beginning with this Thursday meeting. White House is a meeting between the Justice Department officials and lawmakers that Trump requested will happen Thursday. And so one of the questions, this was Nunes and Gowdy, Republicans who, want this information from the DOJ, and the Democrats are saying, no, you shouldn't be turning over your confidential information and your confidential source. And so somebody asked Sarah, are Democrats invited to this meeting? And she said, we'll keep you posted, but no one's shown interest. Shouldn't the meeting be bipartisan?
It should be, but before we get that deep in the weeds, let's look at this meeting for what it is, which is a red herring in which the President of the United States, once again, has tried to introduce the idea that he is the victim of a deep state conspiracy.
Of a spy, which is he said.
Well, no, of a deep state conspiracy in which the FBI investigation, the Mueller investigation, has been tainted by efforts to persecute him instead of to try to find out what happened with the Russians and indeed other matters that the special prosecutor is charged with investigating. So now we have this meeting to investigate the investigators that has been demanded by the President of the United States, who is himself the subject of the investigation. That's the bottom line here. Who attends this red herring of a meeting is much less important than his intervention. Yes, the Democrats might well be admitted and get to see this information, but what we are witnessing is the President trying to put on a parallel and equal split-screen track investigate the investigators, not the Russians, what they did, not the possibility of collusion, and it is all part of a cover-up. And it remains to be seen whether he will let this investigation go forward to its conclusion, an investigation which, as I've indicated by reading Chris Christie's comments, is making real progress according to Mr. Christie. I think that's the kind of thing that Republicans in particular ought to pay attention to rather than the notion of a deep state conspiracy of which there is no evidence that it exists.
Stay with me, Carl. Joseph Moreno, former DOJ prosecutor and former national security prosecutor, also with us as well. Joe, the DOJ expanded this inquiry into this source after Trump demanded it. Did the DOJ's response enable or diffuse the situation? Right move or wrong move?
It's hard to say, Brooke. I mean, I remain confident in our institutions at the Department of Justice. I remain confident in Rod Rosenstein, in Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, and Chris Wray at the FBI, and I hope that if they were being asked to do something improper, they would push back. That's one of the last sort of sets of individuals that I still think we can have tremendous confidence in. So I think that as a tripwire, hopefully that's still intact. I mean, the president is the head of the executive branch. There's nothing implicitly wrong with him asking his department to investigate an allegation about something that could have gone wrong. That being said, as we know, this is not a president that's going to sit idly by and just sort of let this investigation unfold. It's a distraction. Mr. Bernstein's right. It's a red herring, and it's a way to distract from the underlying subject matter.
So are you saying that the Deputy Attorney General felt that he wasn't being asked anything improper?
I have to think that if he were, knowing Rod Rosenstein, he would have pushed back. So I think he must have made a decision that what he was doing was still within the realms of appropriateness. It probably will not play out to anything. It probably will not bear any fruit, but it's probably not improper, at least at this stage. So I have to think he made that determination.
I think we need to look at the question once again of Rosenstein trying desperately to protect this investigation and say, all right, Mr. President, I will call this meeting. We'll take a look at this, because if he doesn't, he's subject to being fired by the President of the United States. That's the underlying theme here. And of course, the President has the authority to fire him for good or ill. Whether it is an obstruction of justice or not, if he fires him is another question. We keep coming back also in this discussion to the question of what the President indicated would be a spy, quote, in his campaign, as opposed to what the FBI calls confidential informants. Confidential or sources or informants. And the purpose, I've looked at many investigations by the FBI in my career, and there are riddled with confidential sources and informants. And the job of those people, and often they are not choir boys and choir girls, is to obtain information relevant to the purpose of the investigation. Thus, The person that has been alleged to be a spy, quote, the confidential source, his purpose and task, from what we know, was to find out through questioning, whatever means seems appropriate, of some people in the Trump campaign, even perhaps leading them on with some questions, to find out whether there were some nefarious dealings with foreign powers. That's what this is about. And my guess is that is what Rod Rosenstein is going to see developed at this meeting. But indeed, this is another opportunity. One of the things that we got to say very clearly, the President of the United States has been very successful. Maybe 45% of the people of this country believe this investigation is a witch hunt, depending on how accurate those polls are by a few percentage points. There is no evidence that this is a witch hunt. And yet we have a whole political party going along with the fiction of a witch hunt because, one, that political party in Congress is afraid of President Trump's base and won't contravene that base, and two, they are demonstrating that they are not interested in the truth of what happened here. They are interested in their ideological and partisan success at the expense of the rule of law and the national interest and the common good. And it'll be for history to judge whether or not they were right in their actions.
Carl Bernstein, thank you. And Joe Moreno, thank you as well. Coming up next on President Trump here, he's laying out terms for a deal with this Chinese telecom company that the intel community says is a threat to national security. We're talking about ZTE. We'll discuss whether the Chinese president actually won this round. Also ahead, President Trump now saying his summit with North Korea, which is set for next month, may or may not happen. And what's the story behind this challenge coin? This is what Sarah Sanders was asked about and said the White House had nothing to do with it. Did someone print this too soon? Coming up. President Trump is denying reports that the U.S. and China have reached a deal that would save this controversial Chinese tech firm called ZTE. According to the Wall Street Journal, these two nations have agreed on this broad outline of a deal to settle this trade dispute. If it goes through, the Wall Street Journal reports that the U.S. would lift a crippling sales ban on ZTE and call for management changes, and the ZTE would possibly face big fines. And while Trump is facing criticism for even negotiating a deal, he says it will help American companies.
We caught them doing bad things. We caught them, not anybody else. We caught them doing bad things, and we essentially made it so difficult that it was shut down. By shutting them down, we're hurting a lot of American companies, really good American companies. And I will tell you, don't think that we didn't hear from them by shutting down this massive phone company. So what I envision is a very large fine of more than $1 billion, could be $1.3 billion. I envision a new management, a new board, and very, very strict security rules. And I also envision that they will have to buy a big percentage of their parts and equipment from American companies.
With me now, CNN senior economics analyst Stephen Moore. Back with us today. He's a former Trump economic advisor. Also with us, CNN political commentator Peter Beinart. So, Peter, I want to start with you here. Just listening to the president, you know, that this would benefit American companies. Is that spin or is that truth?
You know, what's bizarre about it is it really completely contradicts the broader argument he's been making. If you think about the argument he made for steel tariffs or aluminum tariffs, right? That there are also lots and lots of U.S. companies that are hurt by the fact that they would have to pay more for steel and aluminum. Think about car manufacturers, for instance, if they can't get the best price from those components of what they make overseas. So the logic that Trump seems to be offering here, which is we need to help this Chinese company because it sells things to American companies, is exactly the logic that his critics were using against his protectionist policies more generally.
Let me read some tweets listening to you there, Stephen. The tweets from Marco Rubio, for one, Republican, calling out the president's deal-making ability. You have Chuck Schumer saying that the president got played. I mean, this is the type of insult that will no doubt infuriate President Trump. I mean, this has been one of his signature issues for decades, and these are the reviews. Stephen Moore.
Well, a couple things. I mean, first of all, Donald Trump is the first president in a long time to take on China in a very frontal way and stand toe-to-toe with Beijing and say no more. I mean, we know they've been cheating. We know they've been stealing to the tune of about $300 to $400 billion a year. And, you know, my view, I'm a free trade guy, as Peter knows, but I believe it is time that we have a president that really stands up to China and demands concessions for them. Now, bring this right up to date, because I think ZTE is just sort of a poker chip in this grander negotiation, which is whether China will stand down and make concessions. The latest that I'm hearing, Brooke, is that President Trump is getting frustrated that there has been not as much progress as we'd like to see, that Beijing is stonewalling right now. And the big question, I think, ahead of us, putting aside the ZTE issue, is whether or not there will be these very large tariffs imposed on China as a way to punish them. That's on hold for now, but I think it's only a slight reprieve. I think we're going to have to force China back to the bargaining table here, because it's a big problem. We can't continue with them stealing and cheating.
But isn't this also just even zooming out, Peter, and we've been talking so much about North Korea in this impending summit, will it or won't it happen next month? And China is a key player here, right? Because we're hearing from the U.S. administration that it's China who maybe influenced Kim Jong-un in the last week or so to back off this potential for this summit. And would it explain how the president is behaving toward China and ZTE and tariffs to make sure this whole thing happens? You with me?
Yeah, I mean, what I feel like Donald Trump seems not to recognize is that America doesn't have unlimited leverage over every country. Other countries also have leverage over us. And so the most important thing you have to do in foreign policy, as in life, is to prioritize. What is most important for you? If you pick fights with everybody simultaneously, you're not likely to win on any of them. And this is what we're seeing here, right? We can't continue this maximum pressure campaign on North Korea without Chinese help, because they are North Korea's most important economic partner. So if we are simultaneously picking a massive fight with them, get to the brink of a trade war, what do you think the impact of that's going to be on our ability to get them to do what we want on North Korea? The president has to prioritize, and that seems what he seems unable to do.
Well, Peter, look, let me just respond to that. First of all, North Korea is just a puppet regime. They do whatever Beijing tells them to.
That's absolutely not true. No serious North Korea watcher would say that, Steve.
I believe they're a puppet regime. They're completely dependent on China in terms of everything that they have. They're the only country that they do business with.
They've defied China repeatedly.
But here's the more important point. These are both big priorities. You know, we have to denuclearize North Korea, and we have to make sure that China is engaging in the kind of trade behavior that we can live with. And I'm not sure why those two things are mutually exclusive. Now, you know, we can't stand down here. I think that's the point. I mean, there's too many people, I think, on the liberal side who are basically saying, you know, let's just...
Yeah. Surprise, it's the Secretary of State at the State Department briefing. Let's listen.
Creating conditions such that the North Korean regime no longer threatens the world. Final thought, I gave some remarks yesterday on the president's strategy with respect to the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I think it's important that I reemphasize that the tasks that Iran needs to undertake aren't that difficult. I've seen reports that these are a fantasy and they can't happen, but we ask for things that are really very simple that, frankly, most nations in the world engage in. We asked them to stop firing missiles into Riyadh. It's not a fantasy to imagine the Iranians making a decision not to fire missiles into another nation and threatening American lives that travel through that airport. It's not a fantasy to ask them to cease engaging in terror. These were all a set of demands, the demands we put on the rest of the world. If it was the case that some other country in the Middle East desired to build a nuclear weapon system, we would work to stop them too. These are a set of simple requirements that the Iranian regime could quite easily comply with, and it would benefit the Iranian people to an enormous extent. And so, frankly, what we laid out seemed like a pretty straightforward set of requirements that we would put on any country in the world to stop malign behavior that threatens other of its neighbors and other parts of the world. And with that, Heather, I'm happy to take a couple questions.
Okay, just a few minutes for questions. Matt, we met Matt on our last trip.
Yes, Matt, good to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
Washington. Think about what it was for a second.
Well, it's certainly not Pyongyang, that's for sure. Just on North Korea and the meetings today, we have just met, so I don't know if you're a betting man, but if you were a betting man, what would you say the odds are for this meeting actually coming off in at the date and venue that's been set? And if it, are you prepared to go back or to meet again wherever with Kim Jong-un if that is decided, if that's necessary to actually fully prepare for a summit?
I'll take your second question first. Second one is we will do what it takes to make sure that this is a successful meeting, whether that's meeting with the North Koreans in some third country or whatever it may take. We are prepared. The president will ask us to ensure that we've done all we can to make sure that we have the real opportunity to have this historic, successful outcome. And I'm not a betting man, so I wouldn't care to predict whether it will happen, only to predict that we'll be ready in the event that it does.
Nick from Bloomberg.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, sir.
Thanks very much. There were reports that when you met with Kim Jong-un, you were looking out at a sunset, and he allegedly said, wouldn't it be great if there were American hotels lining the scene? Do you believe that he's open to the idea of American investment in North Korea? And can you also give us your thoughts on what would explain the change in tone from North Korea? The president said he thought China had something to do with this.
You mean the tone this past week as opposed to
the last week,
the
correct.
trajectory? No, I'm not going to talk about that, speculate about that. We're preparing. We're continuing to do our work and lay the foundation for a successful meeting. I'm confident we'll get there. With respect to Chairman Kim, I haven't spoken publicly about the conversations we've had. They were between he and I. But I do have a real sense that he would find American investment, American technology, American know-how of real value to his people. And it's something that he and I had a chance to speak about generally, and I do think it's something that if we get this right and we get the denuclearization right, that America would be quite capable of delivering them with lots of things that would make life better for the North Korean people.
Rich Hudson from Fox News.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Hi, Rich.
The South Korean government today put the chances at, we're not talking specific numbers here,